All right, so this week is going to be about dictionaries and how to structure data. We talked about lists and tuples in the past, and those lists are pretty important when you're working with Python. But the main data structure, at least that I always seem to revert back to, is always going to be dictionaries. And there's some advantages to dictionaries over lists. There's also some lists advantages over dictionaries. So we're going to go through those other things this week. You'll have a quiz on Thursday. That will cover the other material up to this point. So everything since the last quiz up till now. We'll go through this dictionaries and data. And then there is a Ford extra credit project out there. I contemplated removing this as it's usually caused more issues than it's worth. But this Ford project used to be one question on my midterm. And there were several questions like it. However, it turned out during that midterm that students were spending 35, 40 minutes on this one question. So I obviously had to change my midterm because nobody passed that one. So what I've done is taken that question in particular and just made it extra credit here. The way that extra credit will work is there's not necessarily going to be graded. I review the material and the things that you submitted, and you try to get as much of it as complete as possible. If your grade hangs on the edge of a particular next letter grade. So for example, you ended up with a B, but you're sitting like at a 88 or an 89 or even an 87 in some cases. Then I will go ahead and take a look at your extra credit. If you gave it the full effort and got everything correct or even partial credit, then I'll give partial credit back. And that just has to be submitted by Sunday. So nothing after Sunday will be accepted. Try your best at it, see what you can do. I can tell you that the students that have gone through and actually at least attempted the Ford project realize that this helped them dramatically on their midterm project. So try the Ford project, make sure that you can do at least some of it. It takes a little bit of practice, and there's a video there at the bottom of the screen that'll help you get through it. I won't cover most of it in a recording simply because of the fact that I like to leave that one as extra credit and let the students that want to challenge themselves go do so. And then if they have questions after the due date on Sunday, then I'll usually go back and revisit something like that.
I think it has a due date of January 3rd on Blackboard.
Yeah, I changed what it showed there. Let me make sure. Yeah, it didn't update. That was from the intercession course. Let's see here. We want 21st. Thank you. That should be fixed now. And I'll go through and update all the other sections here after this. All right. So for chapter 5, dictionaries and the structuring data. So dictionary is just another data type, very similar to what you guys have used before. Like I said, it's kind of like a list. The only difference with a dictionary is your indexes are going to be whatever you want it to be. So it can be multiple different data types, not just integers. In other words, if we want to know what index 0 is in a list, we can pull that out. However, with a dictionary, we use indexes that are called keys. And so everything with a dictionary is a key value pair. And a lot of times, if you guys have come from other languages, you may have heard something very similar to this. So if we look at this example of a dictionary, and note that we use curly braces here as opposed to the square brackets, we have my cat equals, and then we have an index of size, an index of color, an index of disposition. We have values of fat, gray, and loud. So it allows us to basically set attributes to this particular variable, whatever this variable may be. And therefore, if we want to call size, then we call it just like we would on a list. We would say my cat, which is the name of this dictionary here. And we would call in square brackets the index that we want to retrieve. In this case, if we do this, we would get back fat. So it's very similar in lists. Instead of putting a 0 here, we would actually pull back the size in order to get that back, which means that dictionaries are not ordered. It means that they just have a particular set of keys. So note, if you want to get back all these in alphabetical order, we got to do some other fancy stuff to do that. And that's part of what you'll see on that Ford project. So the idea, again, is that the keys in this particular dictionary are size, color, and disposition. Note that a key value pair is set up where you put the first part in the quotes here, then you have a colon, then you have the second part. Now, in this case, we're using strings for everything, but they don't have to be strings. We can use whatever we want. So if we look down here at spam, we see that this index of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, notice this is an integer, not a string, we would get back a luggage combination as the value that would come back there. In the number of 42, we would get back the string of the answer. So we can have lists in there, we can have integers, we can have dictionaries, we can have dictionaries in dictionaries, you can have all sorts of nested things inside of there. Anybody have any questions on just this part? And we'll dive a little deeper into it, but this dictionary concept can sometimes trip people up. So don't be afraid to ask questions or anything like that, because there's more than likely somebody else that is using this. Again, dictionaries are probably one of the most popular things to use in Python. As you can see down here, I have a couple different projects running down here. I'm doing stock market, financial trading and stuff like that. And I write all that code in Python. And when I do that, a large, vast majority of that comes back as a dictionary. And I work with a lot of dictionary data. So dictionaries are extremely important to understand.
Do you have
Note
to
that
use
these,
a single quote, or can you use double? And what do you do if there's an apostrophe?
you talking about in your string?
Yes.
Yeah, you can use double quotes here, and then therefore, if you need a apostrophe in there, you could use the single quote inside. Yep, great question. Great question. So all those rules apply that you've learned so far for strings, they all apply here. All right, so here we're doing a little bit of comparison between dictionaries and lists. Again, remember, dictionaries are unordered. So if we have them in a list like this or a dictionary like this, notice that name, species, and age, we can't really get those back in any ordered way. We can't really slice it like we could a list, where we could just say, you know, give me back these particular orders, and we want to organize them accordingly. So if you have different dictionaries, for example, we have name, Zophi, species, cat, age, notice that they're rearranged with ham, and note that eggs and ham are going to come back as true. And the reason for that is, even though they're in a different order than what they were listed here, they still have the same value because these are unordered objects. If we look up here, or I shouldn't use the word objects, they're unordered data types. If we look up here at lists, what we're going to see is this one starts with cats, dogs, moose. If we reorder those, that is not going to be true in terms of spam equal to bacon, because these are an ordered list. So this is index 0, 1, and 2. Just because we have the same values in there, unless they are in the same order, it is not the same. Pay attention to that for a future question. All right. So for this section here, again, the way we call back a value, if we want to get a value, is we put a key inside of these squared off brackets with the name of the dictionary over here. So we have spam, we call for the variable color. Now in this case, because color does not exist, we're going to get a key error. And therefore we can use try and accept, and we can accept on exception if it does not currently exist inside that dictionary. You can see here where we talk about this, where they don't have any kind of order, but you can set these up where you want these in different dictionaries. So the idea being that you can use some for loops and you can use some other concepts in order to get these organized as you work through it. Skip through that section there. When we work through ordered dictionaries, one thing that you can do, if you see this here, you're going to see where you could send it to the eggs. So we're going to take eggs and we're going to pass it into the list function. And what that's going to do is return all of our keys back of name, species, and age back to a list. And therefore we can call those. Now, because we have a list, we could do things like ordered on top of that. So we can do the dot sort on this particular list, and that would rearrange these back in a value. So what does that look like? So let's say I have something like spam equals, and then we can use cat, mouse, dog, elephant. Okay, so a couple things that we want to do here is we're going to change this to animals. And on cat, we're going to want to set that to small. On mouse, we're going to give it a value of smallest. Dog, we're going to give that a value of larger. Doesn't matter what I'm setting here. I'm just trying to give an example of a dictionary is all. And then elephant, we're going to give that a value of largest. And we'll go back here and make sure that I use the correct symbol, which is a curly bracket. Okay, so if we look at animals, we're going to see we get back this dictionary. If I want to get back all these individual keys and everything else, notice that this isn't in alphabetical order when I see my keys. So there's a couple different ways to do this, and we're going to learn about some other functions here in a minute. But there is a new option here within the newer versions of Python where you can pass this to the list function. So if I say list, and let's call this my list equals, and then we pass it to the list function, and we pass in animals. Now, if we look at my list, notice that we get a list of all these keys that we have inside of here. So now that we have that, we want to go ahead and sort that so we can remember that last week we learned the sort command. And now if we take a look at my list, notice that we now have them in alphabetical order, which means if I was wanting to print these out in a way that was in alphabetical order, all I have to do is pass it to the list function. I get back a list. I sort my list. Now I have this list here. Now I just need to call that particular key against animals so I can print that out in a list. So to do that, we would start with a for loop. So for, and there's several ways to do this, but this is the easiest way. So for, let's see, key in my list, right? So this means for each time we iterate through here, key is going to be set to cat and dog and then elephant and then mouse. And then we're going to say print. And then inside of here, we're going to say, whoops, let's fix that. There we go, print. And we're going to call animals because this is where we want to get back to our dictionary. And inside here, we're going to put our key. Now let's take a look and make sure you understand what's going on in here. So we have our animals dictionary. And then inside here, we're going to put our key because key is the value that comes out of here, which means the first time this runs, animals, and then inside of here is going to be cat, which is going to bring back small. Then we're going to go do it again, and it's going to see set to mouse, or in this case, it's going to be set to dog because we're in an ordered list, and go through. So we take a look, and we'll end up with this value. Now, this doesn't quite make as much sense because of the values that I used here, but the idea is that now I can print out all of those values in a sorted manner. So because we have them all sorted. Remember that this only really works on the sorted side if everything in here is strings, or you would have to have all of your keys be set to integers, etc. So you still have the same rules of .sort that you would have to use on the other side. If you want to use ASCII-betical, in other words, you use uppercase A's and lowercase A's, etc., you would still have to use those options on the sort function. Now, this is kind of a newer concept. Normally, what you would use are these different methods on a dictionary. So you have the keys method, the values method, and the items method. And what these do is they return a data type in and of themselves, referred to as dict keys, dict values, and dict items. Notice that these are not lists. So it's sometimes a little confusing because they look just like a list. However, they're not really a list. And so sometimes in your code, you may have issues like trying to do some looping and some changing and things like that. If you run into that issue, and it'll tell you, it says you cannot iterate over this, then what you have to do is just convert whatever comes back from this, usually dict keys, values, or dict items, convert that to a list so that you can actually manipulate it. And remember, you can convert things to a list simply by passing them to a list function like this. So let's take a look more at what this means here. And this is typically used to loop through things. So if I say animals.keys, this is going to return a dict keys object with a list inside of it that has cat, mouse, dog, elephant. Notice it just does them in the order originally pulled back. Notice this is different than when I called this particular line and got back a true list. So this is not a true list. It looks like a list, but it's not quite a list. It's a dict keys object. But what that allows us to do is display different items in there. So if I went for let's say for key in animals dot keys, print key, you would see that we get those back. Now notice they're not in alphabetical order or anything because we don't have an order per se of an actual dictionary up here. That would be this other little stuff that we showed you here on how to sort that. Another one that you can do is say for value in animals dot values. This will return a list-like object of all the values that are in your dictionary. So we could say print value. There we go. And so now we have each one of these all the way down. And then lastly, the last method that you would call is you would use something like for k comma v in animals dot items. Now, before I go any further, does anybody notice that here we're just using a single variable, right? Because we're getting back keys and therefore we can call that back. In items, we're actually getting back tuples, which means we have to use our multiple assignment trick in order to assign the two values that come back out of items. And the things that come back out of items are your keys and your values. So a lot of times when you see somebody iterate through an items list or an items dictionary type here, you're going to see that they assign it KV. You can call this whatever you want. You don't have to use KV. Remember that those are just placeholders for what you're using in your for loop. So we could say print K, and for printing K, we would do something like K, and then we could have a plus, and we could say, there we go. Again, I'm trying to use the options that you guys have learned so far. And so it looks something like this. So what I did here is we're going to print K out, which is the key. Then we're going to print a colon, semicolon, or a colon right after it with a space. And then we're going to print the value so that it looks something like this. Cat, small, mouse, largest, etc. Now we can format this however we want. And there's better ways to do this print statement. We're going to learn that here in a little bit.
How did it know you're asking for the keys in the values?
In which one?
In your example, how did it know it's looking for the keys? Just because you use the dot items?
Correct. So dot items is returning both the keys and the values as a tuple. Does that make sense? So if it looks a little bit easier if I show you this way. Dot items. Notice how we get back tuples of these individual things inside of a list-like object with comma separated. So this is what dict items looks like. We have cat small, we have mouse largest, doll larger, and elephant largest. We are assigning K to this first value, V to the second value inside the tuple. Remember, these K and V's are completely irrelevant variables. We can call them whatever we want. So we could say for key, comma, value in animals, items, print, and then we would have to use keys. I'm sorry, key. There we go. And value. And we get the same thing back. Great question. Great question. It's a lot easier to see when you see it like this fashion here. So again, we're using that multiple assignment trick to assign these variables, variable names to these individual items that come back out of the tuple. Anybody have any questions over using keys, values, and items? And this is another way to look at it. So if we use like this example here, if we say for I, and again, this doesn't matter, we could call it for pair. Let's do that. In animals dot items, print pair. Notice that pair comes back as a tuple. Remember, tuples are using parentheses. Does anybody remember the main difference between tuples and lists?
Tuples can't be changed.
You got it. So tuples are immutable, which means they cannot be changed. Lists are mutable, which means we can manipulate and change them. So great work. All right. So there's, again, if I want to call something out of there specifically, I have my animals and say I want to get back cat, I would just call it like this and I would get back small. So I can get that value out of there. If I want to change cat to something else, I would do the same thing. So animals, cat, and then we just set it to whatever value we want. So we're using the assignment operator, the equal sign, to change whatever that value is. So we could set it to whatever. And now if we look at our animals, cat, we're going to get whatever back. We changed it inside there. So if I just look at animals, we can see that the value for cat got changed here. Anybody have any questions over these three methods? You'll be using them quite a bit. Now, remember, if you try to get back, for example, dot keys here, I'm going to get this keys back. If I need to make this as a true list, for some reason I want to iterate through or something that doesn't allow me to script through there, then all I have to do is pass that to the list function in order to get that back. So I could say something like my keys equals animals dot keys. And I would need to put that inside a list function if I wanted this to be a list. So it'd be something like this. And now if I look at my keys, I have that value back. It looks like now, in order to shorthand this, you can do a faster way and just do something like my keys equals list, and then just pass the name of the actual dictionary. It defaults to the keys option. So if I look at my keys now, I get the same value back. I don't have to type dot keys. But if I wanted it to be something like my values, then I would have to use list animals dot my value or values. My values is now equal to all the values that came back. You can use other options like the in and not in operator. What this will allow you to do is check to see if something's in there. So say we wanted to check in an if statement or something like that. So if, let's see, rabbit in animals dot keys. Again, what this is doing is letting me check to see if there is a rabbit key value inside of there. And if so, then we're going to do something like print it's in there. And if not, then we're going to do nothing happens, right? Because rabbit's not in there. You could do just a check here in the actual interpreter, but in your script, you would want it in some kind of if statement. So we will just check to see if rabbit in animals dot keys, and notice that evaluates to false, and that's the reason we don't see the print statement in there. But if we had something like cat in animals dot keys, then we would get something true back. So you can use the in and not in operators in order to check to see if something's in there. Again, you may want to use the not in, the opposite case, so that you can do a check. And then we get into some other methods that are useful for dictionaries. So we have the get method. And what the get method will do is go through and try to find that variable. If it doesn't find that variable, it's going to return whatever you pass it. So for example, if I say animals.get, and I want to get rabbit, but if it doesn't have the value of rabbit, in other words, it doesn't show up, then what I want to get is, let's just throw in a variable of 0. And so if I run this, I get back 0 because rabbit does not show up in animals. If I use animals.get and I put in cat, we know that cat's in there. And if I don't get that, return me 0. Notice I get back whatever because it found that as a key inside animals. So the get method allows you to retrieve something. If it doesn't exist, return me a default value. So this keeps you from having to run like a try and except to see if something's in there, or an if statement to see if something's in there. You can just say, hey, go find me cat. If cat doesn't exist, return me back whatever I want. And I could return back whatever I want. We could say something like animals get, and if we call rabbit and we say that is not in there, we will get back our string that says that is not in there. Notice that we didn't change or we didn't do anything to our dictionary. So we didn't add rabbit to it. We didn't do anything else. We just checked to say, hey, if rabbit's in there, if it's not, give us back this default value, which is going to be different than the set method or the set default method. And so what the set default method does is it takes the similar type variables. We're going to say animals dot set default. And this time we're going to say rabbit. And if we don't find the rabbit, we're going to actually set a default value. And so now we're going to say hopper. And hit enter, we're going to get back hopper. But if we go back and look at animals, what it did was find out whether or not rabbit's in there. And if rabbit is not in there, then we're going to set a variable and a key value pair of rabbit and whatever value we wanted back of hopper. So notice that rabbit got added to the dictionary. So that the difference between set default and get will go check and return a default value, but does not change the dictionary. Set default will go check if it doesn't exist, then it can allow you to set that variable on the fly. Anybody have any questions between those two? This is a pretty common area where people get tripped up.
I have a question about in.
Yeah.
If you don't put the dot keys or values, does it search for both of them?
No, it just searches in the keys. So,
Okay,
for example, what set method does is it's a shorthand way of doing this. So, for example, I have animals, and we could say if give me another animal here, hawk. If hawk not in animals, then we're going to say animals hawk. This equals bird. And now if we look at animals, we can see that hawk was added, right? Because we set that value with our if statement. But instead of having to have my list all the way out of here, then writing these extra lines of code, I can use the set default method to shorthand that, where all I have to do is say hawk here and put bird here. And if hawk doesn't exist, then go ahead and add it to the list and set the value to whatever my default value is.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
What does the set default method return if it's already in the list?
It would return back whatever the value is. So if I do animals dot set default and I call for rabbit now, and we still have something else in our default return, it's going to return hopper because it found it in the list or in the dictionary.
And it will not change the value?
It will not change the value. So now if we look at animals, notice that rabbit is still hopper.
Okay.
This is just a default value to say, hey, return this or set this if rabbit doesn't exist. If it does exist, return me back whatever value is in there. Excellent questions. Really appreciate you guys asking those because that, again, you're not the only ones to ask that. And there's another 50 students in the online sections that don't get a chance to ask questions. So appreciate that. Okay. So again, that is going to be the set default method. Pay attention to this section here. Hint, hint, wink, wink. It will show up again shortly. The idea of how can you shorthand this particular lines of code, you can use the set default method, in which case you need to set it with whatever key that you're looking for. And then if that key doesn't exist, what value you want to both return and set inside the dictionary. All right. That takes us to another one called pretty print. And so if you'll notice, if we look back here and we say print animals, we get back this dictionary and it just kind of dumps it on the screen. So if you guys are actually in your script and everything, and remember everything I'm doing on this interpreter is like doing it in a script and then going up to run and then running it and then getting the output here. I'm just shorthanding it to show you the immediate effect of it. But remember, all homework and everything else you always want to do inside your script. I do have everybody's homework 1 graded. Homework 2 should be done by the end of hopefully today or tomorrow. I'll make sure you guys all get those values back so you know where you're situated. So far, I've seen really great things. The number one thing is pay attention to what the homework is asking you for, making sure that you at least get what's in the homework. Some of you guys have done above and beyond what's listed. That's perfectly fine. I will never discount that. But make sure you at least have what the project or the homework assignment was asking for inside of there. If you have something that will at least interpolate down and actually runs in Python, I'll give you the points, but I usually give you feedback to say there's a better way of doing that. All right. So we'll notice that we try to print these key value pairs, and this is kind of hard when it dumps it out to the screen here. Again, this is nothing more than me taking this dictionary and me setting it in here like this, and then me saying something like print animals, and then I run this, and we will call this a dictionary. There we go, and we get this dumped out on the screen. So a lot of times when you guys are troubleshooting and you want to kind of see what's in your current dictionary, and remember, using that print statement to see what's currently in the dictionary, every programmer does that. If you are trying to figure out on the fly what's on the screen or you're debugging, that is how you debug currently until we show you how to do differently. You just simply print it out to the screen. But this can be a little hard to see, especially if you have a lot of values. For example, when I'm running my stock values and I'm running all the different ticker items and everything else and trying to get back pricing, there's a lot that gets returned in this dictionary. So what you might want is a better way to print that out. And so if you want to have a better way to print dictionaries, we will import what's called pretty print. So pprint. Remember, when you guys do imports, this is something I saw on your second homework assignment. Always make sure that you do your imports at the top of your script. Don't do them out here in the middle because that makes it very hard for somebody later to know what you need to import. Where you have something like import pretty print and it's a built-in module, it's not that big of a deal. But it will be a big deal if you use a third-party package later on and you don't put that at the top, then somebody doesn't know that it needs that until after the program crashes. So just be in the habit of always putting your imports at the top. All right, so instead of doing this, what I can now do is pprint.pprint. Notice the reason I have to repeat this twice is we have the module name because we did import pprint. We have to call the module name, and then the function is also called pprint. And we're going to call that against animals. So if we run this, notice now we have a nice little value pair that we can see easily on the screen. Another thing that where you may actually see this is if you look up here at animals, notice how this runs off the screen here, right? And that makes it really hard. When you guys are working on your projects, that becomes a little more difficult. So with dictionaries, you can always go to this part here. So notice how I type this first key value pair. If I hit enter at the next line, the editor will, oops, wrong one. The editor will automatically align these up for you in an indented fashion so that you can see them much easier in here. And the idea is that when you print that out to the screen, you're going to actually see it in that fashion. Now, if I take this back off and just go to print and run this, notice it doesn't affect my output that actually goes out to the user. This is purely for me to see this inside my script. So if you want this to be nice and clean to go out to the user, you would use something like pretty print. Now, if you guys are going to print your dictionary out to a user, I typically don't want to see it in this fashion where it's actually inside a dictionary. You should probably be using some kind of for loop to print it out in a nice, clean fashion to the user if it's something you intend to be printed out. Does that make sense? If you're just troubleshooting, then it doesn't matter. You're just looking at the values so that you can make sure whatever you were doing at that point in your code was actually there. However, if you actually want to display something back to the user, then you shouldn't be printing it out in this fashion. Same way with lists, you shouldn't be printing a list out to the screen. You should be doing a for loop to go through that list and present it in a nice, clean fashion to the user. Does anybody have any questions over that? Because that's going to come up here real quick when we get to our midterm projects.
So if you import pprint, you don't have to call it. You can automatically alter that list up there to indent it.
For this, no. Pprint is only if you want it to print out to this individual here. You do not have to have pprint to do this little function that we have here. That you could do this at any time. The only thing pprint does is allow you to print it out cleanly to the end user, which is honestly only beneficial if you are going to do troubleshooting. In other words, you have such long values. Right here, I've got pretty short keys and pretty short values. They don't run off the screen. But say I have something long over here, like a whole sentence or something for whatever reason in the value, that can make it hard to read on the screen. And so pretty print makes that where it's nice and clean versus something like this. Honestly, pretty print is mostly useful for troubleshooting, and that way you can see what's going on out there. Anybody have any questions over pretty print? Now you can also use a function called pretty print p format. And what that's going to do is print that out in a little bit different fashion. So if we import pretty print again, and this time we're going to call pprint dot p format. And then that will come through here. What we actually want is some dictionary value. It basically just pretty prints it in. Oh, we have to put it in print statement. Sorry, it formats it. That's what I'm missing. If you do it in this fashion, notice how it pretty much returns the same thing in this particular case. But if you're doing like a loop or something like that, it'll actually clean this code up and make it a little easier to see. So you can see that I don't use it. These are the same and the equivalent of doing the same. Notice this one, we had to call it to the print function in order to get that pretty print format set up. So you could just call this directly. All right. There's going to be some really good examples, as you're going to see in here for the rest of this section, on what you could do and how to change things and practice. I encourage you to practice with these. What I would do for doing the practice is look at our the Ford project, and I'll kind of briefly show you what that looks like here. So things that you would use data structures for, like here, if you're writing a chess game, you can usually use different values so that you can set those in there. So you could say, you know, the 1H is set to the B king and 6C, and notice that it's using a coordinate system in order to do that. So 8C, as we can see, was going to be this spot. We could leave it empty, or we could have a actual value inside of there. This could be beneficial for like tic-tac-toe type stuff or any kind of coordinate system that you want out there. You could use it for that as well. Anybody have any questions over dictionaries? Again, it's a very important data type. You guys will more than likely use them in your midterm projects. Again, the advantage is instead of having to use indexes of 0 through whatever, is that you can actually set a key value so that it makes a little more sense as to what's going on. Remember that here we have a string and a string, but I can set all sorts of different variables inside of that if I wanted to. So for example, for the cat value, I may have a list for some reason that I want something in there. So we could call it like a tabby. We could call it a tuxedo. I don't know my cats. I'm just Garfield. I don't know. But you can have a whole list of these. And then when you call that option back, you can do something like animals print. Let's do this. Print animals cat. And you'll notice in this one that, whoops, there we go, that I'm going to get back my list. Whoops, where's my syntax? Oh, I forgot my comma. There we go. It will get back this, and therefore I could do something like for value in animals cat print value. And what that will do is rotate through that list and print it out nice and clean to the user itself. So where is this information going to be useful? Well, if we come back here and take a look at the Ford project, and again, I have a dedicated video that kind of helps you get started in this Ford project. But if we take a look at it, what the Ford project is, and this is pretty common when you're doing programming. In this case, Ford is looking to, at their car lineup, their database manager is gone. And so they've tasked you with using a single Python file script in order to help them gather some information. Here is the output of what they have in their database, but they don't have anything that would allow them to manipulate this kind of data in any form. So this is pretty common. You may get a printout and you have to get this into your Python script in some form or fashion. That's the other way I like to look at a dictionary, as a cheap, lightweight database, so to speak. So for those of you that really know what databases are and how to use them, there's a whole lot more functionality to a database. A dictionary is like a very small database where you could have a key value pair somewhere there where you can return different values. So in this case, we have the name of all these different cars from Ford. We have the year that they were introduced, the production models of the current models, what year they were returned, all this kind of vehicle information stuff. What we say in the very beginning is write a dictionary for each car that contains the fields, keys, and the values listed above. So if you watch the video, you'll see how that works. But the idea would be if we had something like this, I'm just going to show this real quick because I know we're at the end of our time here. You would have something like car one equals, and then you would start your dictionary. And for this one, we're going to have name. And then we want the value of this first car. So this one is ca, like this, then comma, and then we start the next one down. So we would have something like year introduced. And that value for the first car is 1996. And notice that I'm using this as an integer for this one here. I may want to use it as a string, depends on what you want to do. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and just put it as a string. And then in this side, we would have production of the current model. And that one is going to be 2014. Again, we're going to put that as a string. Then you would just continue on all the way through here. So this other one's going to be generation. And this is going to be the third generation. And last, vehicle information. Just copy this out of here. Oops, there we go. So this is what the first dictionary would look like for car number one. And so this first item that you need to do is create a dictionary for each one of these cars that contains those values. This is how you would do car one. So you would essentially just repeat this for car two. So we would go just repeat it. We can change this to 2. And then what we can do here is change that to Fiesta. So you'll notice now that everything's kind of here. It's much easier and faster to update, 1976. And then keep filling all this data out, 2017. The idea being that these other ones are going to ask you to write functions. Remember, functions are going to be a little bit different there. So let's see, when you say write a function, you're asking for a def value? Yes. So make sure that these are actually functions, not just code inside your script. So for example, this first one says, write a function that will take a list of these dictionaries and return them as a new dictionary with the name value as the key and the dictionary as the value. Okay, so what does that mean? That means I would do something like def, let's call it new cars. I don't remember what I called it in the video, but that would be the idea. And we're going to call this our card dict for card dictionary. Actually, it's car list rather, right? So notice it says we are going to take a list of these dictionaries. All right, so what that means is if I come up here, I need to create a list. So cars equals, and then I need to put those cars inside this list. So car 1, car 2. And obviously I would do that for all the cars above. Whoops, car 2. So this needs to take in my cars list. And inside my cars list, it says return a new dictionary. So we need a new dictionary here. We'll call it new dict equals, and then we're going to have it empty. And then it says with the name as the value as the key. Okay, so what that means is we want the name key inside of our car dictionary. So if we look at our car dictionary, we need to do a for loop. So for car in cars. So the first time we do this, we're going to get back this dictionary and we say, okay, here's our name key. Here's our value that comes out of this. We want to set that as our new one. So new dict equals, and actually in this one, there we go. We're going to set it as the name. So we're going to call our car name. Okay. Just to make sure you guys see what's going on here, we're going to pull the name out of this dictionary. We're going to set that as the key for our new dictionary that we have here. And for the value of this, we're going to set it to the entire dictionary. So we're going to say car, because remember, we're looping through each one of these. And then as we get done with that, we're going to return new dict. So if we actually want to see what's going on here, we would have to do something like print new cars. And we would call our car list is what we have to submit. So we're passing in cars. And if we run that, let me get rid of all this extra stuff up here. And then we can run. You'll see this function not scriptable. So the reason we're getting function not scriptable is because we are getting back, let's see, we are returning the value that comes out of there. So we would have to say something like new dictionary here equals, and then we're going to set this. So new cars, and then we're going to pass in cars, and then print new dictionary. There we go. And so we'll notice that we get a new dictionary back that has the name of that car, and as the value, it's the entire dictionary for that car all the way through. And so we could use something like pretty print to print that out or whatnot, but just follow what this needs. So it just says write a function, which means when you submit this homework or this project, you would not have this stuff down here. This is what you're looking for, which is a very simple function. I know that's a little bit over the top, or it seems complicated right now. We'll cover a little bit more on Thursday. I may end up remaking the video so that you guys can understand how this project works and get you started on the first couple functions. Would you guys like to meet and do that on Wednesday?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll meet on Wednesday. I'll remake the car video. We'll just kind of go through these first couple ones. And then you guys will be free to do your quiz as well. Just remember, as long as you do your best on this homework assignment, try to get it all in, get it submitted by Sunday. It's not a requirement. It is for extra credit. But what I do for, quote, extra credit is if it comes down to the wire at the very end of the semester, I take into account how much homework you turned in, how hard have you been trying in the course, all that kind of stuff. Then I go, okay, did they attempt the homework or the extra credit? If they attempted the extra credit and they really did well throughout the rest of the class, they did well in their midterm and their final project, that is what I will use to help round you up to the next letter grade. If you're within reasonable value for that to happen. If you're at an 81, I won't round you up to a 90. All right, we will see everybody on Wednesday.